Diarrhea is an increase in the frequency of bowel movements, an increase in the looseness of stool, or both. Diarrhea is caused by increased secretion of fluid into the intestine, reduced absorption of fluid from the intestine, or rapid passage of stool through the intestine. Symptoms associated with diarrhea include abdominal pain, especially cramping. Other symptoms depend on the cause of the diarrhea. Diarrhea can be defined absolutely or relatively. Absolute diarrhea is defined as more than 5 bowel movements a day or liquid stools. Relative diarrhea is defined as an increase in the number of bowel movements per day or an increase in the looseness of stools compared with an individual's usual bowel habit. Diarrhea may be either acute or chronic, and each has different causes and treatments. Complications of diarrhea include dehydration, electrolyte, mineral abnormalities, and irritation of the anus. What's up, fellow human? I'm Joshua, and this is the Stomach Health Channel, where I'm going to discuss different facts, remedies, and such about your gut. Now, let's get on with the video. Tests that are useful in the evaluation of acute diarrhea include examination of stool for white blood cells or enzymes that they produce, parasites, cultures of stool for bacteria, testing of stool for the toxins of C. difficile, and blood tests for electrolyte abnormalities. Tests that are useful in the evaluation of chronic diarrhea include examination of stool for parasites, upper gastrointestinal X-rays, UGI series, barium enema, esophagogastroduodenoscopy, egged with biopsies, colonoscopy with biopsies, small intestinal endoscopy with biopsies, hydrogen breath testing, measurement of fat in the stool, and pancreatic function tests. Dehydration can be treated at home with home remedies, oral rehydration solutions, absorbents that absorb water in the intestine, anti-motility medications, bismuth compounds, and Romanfor fluids if necessary. Antibiotics should not be used in treating diarrhea unless there is a culture-proven bacterial infection that requires antibiotics, severe diarrhea that is likely to be infectious in origin, or an individual has serious underlying diseases. What is diarrhea? Diarrhea is an increase in the frequency of bowel movements or a decrease in the form of stool, greater looseness of stool. Although changes in frequency of bowel movements and looseness of stools can vary independently of each other, changes often occur in both. Diarrhea needs to be distinguished from 4 other conditions. Although these conditions may accompany diarrhea, they often have different causes and different treatments than diarrhea. These other conditions are incontinence of stool, which is the inability to delay bowel movements until an appropriate time, for example, until one can get to the toilet. Rectal urgency, which is a sudden urge to have a bowel movement that is so strong that if a toilet is not immediately available, there will be incontinence. Incomplete evacuation, which is a sensation that another bowel movement is necessary soon after a bowel movement, yet there is difficulty passing further stool the second time. Bowel movements immediately after eating a meal. Well, what do you think about these? Have you experienced this or tried some? Comment down below your experiences. And if you think these are useful, a like and subscribe would be really awesome for the growth of my channel. And also, don't forget about the bell icon below. Let's get on. Foods that trigger diarrhea. Certain foods may trigger diarrhea in some people. Some foods to avoid that may cause diarrhea include fried foods, foods with rich sauces, fatty cuts of meat, citrus fruit, artificial sugar, too much fiber, fructose, peppermint. What is considered diarrhea? Diarrhea can be defined in absolute or relative terms based on either the frequency of bowel movements or the consistency, looseness of stools. Frequency of bowel movements. Absolute diarrhea is having more bowel movements than normal. Thus, since among healthy individuals, the maximum number of daily bowel movements is approximately 3, diarrhea can be defined as any number of stools greater than 3, although some consider 5 or more bowel movements to be diarrhea. Relative diarrhea is having more bowel movements than usual. Thus, if an individual who usually has 1 bowel movement each day begins to have 2 bowel movements each day, then relative diarrhea is present, even though there are not more than 3 or 5 bowel movements a day. That is, there is not absolute diarrhea, consistency of stools. Absolute diarrhea is more difficult to define on the consistency of stool because the consistency of stool can vary considerably in healthy individuals depending on their diets. Thus, individuals who eat large amounts of vegetables will have looser stools than individuals who eat few vegetables and or fruits. Stools that are liquid or watery are always abnormal and considered diarrheal. Relative diarrhea is easier to define based on the consistency of stool. Thus, an individual who develops looser stools than usual has relative diarrhea, even though the stools may be within the range of normal with respect to consistency. Why does diarrhea develop? With diarrhea, stools usually are looser whether or not the frequency of bowel movements have increased. This looseness of stool, which can vary all the way from slightly soft to watery, is caused by increased water in the stool. During normal digestion, food is kept liquid by the secretion of large amounts of water by the stomach, upper small intestine, pancreas, and gallbladder. Food that is not digested reaches the lower small intestine and colon in liquid form. The lower small intestine, and particularly the colon, absorb the water, turning the undigested food into a more or less solid stool with form. Increased amounts of water in stool can occur if the stomach and or small intestine secrete too much fluid, the distal small intestine, colon do not absorb enough water, or the undigested, liquid food passes too quickly through the small intestine and colon for enough water to be removed. Another way of looking at the reasons for diarrhea is to divide it into 5 types. The first is referred to as secretory diarrhea, because too much fluid is secreted into the intestine. The second type is referred to as osmotic diarrhea, in which small molecules that pass into the colon without being digested and absorbed draw water and electrolytes into the colon and stool. The third type is referred to as motility-related diarrhea, in which the intestinal muscles are overactive and transport the intestinal contents through the intestine without enough time for water and electrolytes to be absorbed. The fourth type is unusual. It is best represented by a condition called collagenous colitis. In collagenous colitis, the mechanism of the diarrhea may be the inability of the colon to absorb fluid and electrolytes because of the extensive scarring of the intestinal lining. Inflammation also may play a role. The fifth type of diarrhea is referred to as inflammatory diarrhea and involves more than one mechanism. For example, some viruses, bacteria, and parasites cause increased secretion of fluid, either by invading and inflaming the lining of the small intestine. Inflammation stimulates the lining to secrete fluid, or by producing toxins, chemicals, that also stimulate the lining to secrete fluid, but without causing inflammation. Inflammation of the small intestine and or colon from bacteria or from non-bacterial ileitis colitis can increase the rapidity with which food passes through the intestines, reducing the time that is available for absorbing water. Diarrhea generally is divided into 2 types, acute and chronic. Acute diarrhea lasts from a few days up to a week. Chronic diarrhea can be defined in several ways, but usually lasts more than 3 weeks. It is important to distinguish between acute and chronic diarrhea because they usually have different causes, require different diagnostic tests, and require different treatment. It's a literal pain in the ass when you have diarrhea, pun unintended. But I might have here a medicine that may help you with it. And no, it's not a sponsored post. It's just an affiliate link where I get a commission if you buy this product using my link in the description. It would really help me if you do this, but I won't force you. This is Imodium, and I'm sure you've heard of it. It's of course a diarrhea relief medicine, and don't just take my word for it. Look at these 6,000 5-star reviews on Amazon. Not to brag, but it has faster effectiveness than Pepto-Bismol in diarrhea. It's also the #1 doctor-recommended OTC diarrhea treatment. If you're interested, just click the link under this description. What do you think about these information? Do you think it's useful? If it is, support this channel by giving it a like and subscribe. And also don't forget to click the notification bell for more interesting facts like these.